I'd like to start our tour off by getting to know you a little bit in a certain way, and that is I'm going to ask you a couple questions and tell you a few things myself. Are there any pilots among you? No? What have you been doing now?
I've been with them.
Okay. We have an airline pilot. Good. Are there any engineers among you? What kind?
Mechanical.
I was lucky enough to fly for the whole time, which is basically unheard of. But it was my choice and my passion to do that, so I did. I was a test pilot in the Air Force. I taught at the Air Force Test Pilot School. And when I got out of the service, I had the credentials to continue that line of work, fortunately. So I was a experimental test pilot for 3 different major aircraft manufacturers. Fairchild, McDonnell Douglas, and Boeing. So I've been in aviation all my life, and I'll try to use some of my experiences to give a little luster to this tour. How's that? All right, this tour belongs to you. All right, I don't care where we go or what we see, but you might. So if there's something you must see, even some general class of things you must see, like fighter planes or World War II planes or private airplanes, commercial airplanes, any of that, let me know. But if you don't just tell me, then I'm going to still find out some things about what you want by seeing your reaction to what I choose to show you, and by your questions. Please ask a lot of them, all right? See, there's no script here. I can dream up what to show you, or you can dream up what to ask for, and it will happen, all right? It doesn't make any difference how few or how many of these artifacts we see. What happens is we want you to go home with a certain sense of fulfillment, like you have seen something interesting, or you've seen something you want to remember, or you got an answer to a question that's been nagging you, all right? So let's start without further delay down here. The staff here at the Air and Space Museum, Udvar-Házy Centre, tells us that we have about 180 airplane artifacts here. Can you imagine? Aren't you amazed with that big number? So since there's so many, it kind of goes without saying that in an hour and a half we're not going to see them all. I bet that's occurred to you. It should, all right? So time is of the essence, and we're going to economize on time by briefing all of these airplanes behind me as if they were one. Now, that might sound crazy, but I'm going to try to persuade you that that's a very good idea. And here we go. They're so much alike that they might as well all be the same airplane, honestly. Look with me just about the general characteristics. First of all, every one is a biplane. They have an upper and a lower wing, right? That's good for lift, but it has a downside. And my mechanical engineer, wherever he may be, right here, will know that those struts and braces are extremely necessary to keep the wings on. However, your aeronautical engineer buddy, me, is going to tell you, oh no, not struts and braces. They produce so much aerodynamic drag that it's just ridiculous. Okay, it is just ridiculous. Look how many there are here, like here, see. Okay, there's other things that they have in common. Look, they're mostly all tail draggers. See, they have a tail wheel instead of a nose wheel like modern airplanes. You see this Stearman right here, Boeing Stearman aircraft trainer, has 2 open cockpits. Open cockpits actually cause drag. Did you know that? They're not streamlined. There's a great big turbulent eddy that comes off of the windscreen, and it might keep the bugs in the air out of the pilot's face, but it causes a lot of drag. Okay. Notice their fixed landing gear. The wheels don't come up. So you drag around your landing gear through the air the whole time you're flying, and that's not particularly good for fuel consumption either, see? Okay, I bet you would like to know something about how their performance was, and how fast they were, and how big their engines were. Well, you're going to hear that if you want to or not. Here we go. I like to characterize these airplanes in the following kind of comical way. They don't fly fast, they don't fly high, they don't fly far, and they don't carry much. And who's surprised? This is where it all began, see? These planes behind me are from a time which we arbitrarily call early flight, and it's between the time of the first man-powered flight, the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk in 1903, up until the end of the 1920s. So that's when these planes were there. But you know, don't be bothered by the fact they don't have much performance. Think about any other mode of transportation. The first cars were small. The first trains were small. The first boats were small. Anything that was powered by an engine started out small, all right? And just to make that point real clear to you, I'm going to ask you to guess for me, unless you happen to be a scholar of this, you might know for sure. How big do you think the engine was on the Wright brothers airplane they first flew in 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina? How much? How many? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anybody?
6.5.
You two are the closest. It was 12. There are riding mowers that have more power than that. Can you imagine flying an airplane on 12 horsepower? Well, they saw the light real quick, and they immediately after that went up to 36 horsepower, which is a little more reasonable. But anyway, do you realize they built that engine by hand? I mean, holy cow, you go around building an engine by hand. Yeah. Anyway, we've come a long way, and this is the starting point, you see. So anyway, with these little engines, how little were they? Well, maybe you'd easily find some in the area of, say, about 60 to 160 horsepower. That'd be real typical. And with that engine and all this drag, let's see what they really do for speed. And again, you would find speeds maybe around, I don't know, 70 to 130 miles an hour, something like that. So you kind of get the picture, don't you? They're fragile, they're made of wood mostly with fabric covering, they're slow, and they're the best we had at the time. But you should be struck already by the fact that we have gone into an explosive growth in aviation. In all of history, we're only talking about 100 years, 112 years, and look what we've done. We've gone from the Wright brothers flying one guy 120 feet to putting a man on the moon and all kinds of other wonderful things we've done. See, we have really come far. So please turn around now and I'll show you one of the steps that made us start on this rapid pace. Don't be disheartened when I talk about this airplane a little bit more than normal because it's so very important. Yes, sir?
Is that what they call a yellow peril?
No, the yellow peril is that. We'll comment on that a little later if you remind me. Were you in the Navy? No. Is that how you know about that? Okay. All right, here we go. This airplane right here is called a Hawker Hurricane. It's a British airplane, and it just occupies an incredibly important part in aviation history. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and a little bit about the airplane. Let's start about the airplane first. Remember I told you that the early flight era, as we have arbitrarily defined it, ends about 1928. Well, here we have an airplane that began in 1935, 7 years later than those. I want to impress upon you how different this plane is. Answer my question. Is it a biplane?
No.
No. Does it have draggy struts and braces?
No.
No. Does it have an open cockpit? No. Does it have a small engine? Don't answer. You don't know. But I'm going to help you. Hidden in that sleek little nacelle there is a 1,000 horsepower Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It's 7 years later, it's 1,000 horsepower. And right after the first ones of these Hawker Hurricanes had 1,000 horsepower, by the time they get up to this one a couple years later, it was 1,300 horsepower, see? Now this is a liquid-cooled engine made by the Rolls-Royce company, famous engine builders. To this day, all the way from World War I to this day, these fantastic engines, of course they make jets now, and many of the world's biggest airliners are powered by Rolls-Royce engines right now, along with General Electric and Pratt & Whitney. Okay, but anyway, it's a modern propeller, way different than those over there. This is not a basic wooden propeller. This is a fancy propeller called a constant speed propeller. Okay? Does it have fixed landing gear or not? You can tell right away that it has a mechanism for bringing the wheels up, right? Okay. Well, now then, you're probably interested in what's it made of. Well, it's a warplane, And I want you to just think about this thought. Would you rather go into air-to-air combat in an airplane that was made out of wood and fabric, or one that's made out of metal? I kind of think you know it'd be better to be in the metal one, wouldn't it? All right? Well, you see this radio antenna here behind the pilot? Right there. There. Everything forward of that is solid metal. I mean, completely metal. Of course, not solid metal, but completely metal. And behind that, the outer structure actually is shaped by wooden spars and fabric, but the inner load-bearing structure is still metal. See? So it's a much stronger airplane. Now the fun part. This is a 300-mile-an-hour airplane, doubling the speed in 7 years. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to point out before I go into the historical part is the weapons. You know, when airplanes started shooting at one another, they actually were doing it with handguns. They'd go up with a pistol and take a few shots, and the other guys were astonished. What's this guy doing shooting at me? You know, he was an enemy, of course, but they never even dreamed that planes would be shooting at one another. They used to be used for finding out stuff, you know, looking around and seeing where the enemy was. Well, anyway, they went from these handguns to some pretty small machine guns. Now, some of you have heard of a 30-06, probably, haven't you? A 30 caliber rifle. Well, there were a whole bunch of years when 30 caliber machine guns were the norm. Well, they really have little bullets. Imagine shooting down an airplane with a 30 caliber bullet. I mean, they're really little. Well, they had a lot of guns, though. Some of these had 12 guns in the wings because they were shooting these little baby bullets. Well, that didn't work very good, so they thought, let's go up a little bit. So they went up to a thing called 50 caliber machine guns, and those are a ½ inch across. Now we're starting to get kind of serious here. You know, one of those could definitely hurt an airplane, and lots of them could take one down. But this particular Hawker Hurricane was made for a different mission. It was made for ground attack, and it needed even more firepower. So they went up to a different weapon size called a 20 millimeter, and so we have 4 20 millimeter cannons here. And when I say the word cannon, what that's supposed to mean to you is that every shell can have an explosive charge in it, see? It doesn't have to. It can be ball ammunition, solid. It can be high explosive, or it can be tracer, see, so you can see it go, all right? But anyway, this gun here, start 1935 in this plane, was still used clear up in the F-16 even. See, his 20 millimeter cannon. Okay, so anyway. Now let's talk about the history, which is probably why this plane is so important. In 1935, the British began to look across the English Channel, and they saw a great deal of unrest in Central Europe, the type of thing that could lead to a world war, heaven forbid, at any time. Now, the British were not interested in taking anybody's land or hurting anybody or whatever. They didn't want to be in a war, but they had no choice, and they were afraid for this reason. The materials of war back then were moved by sea. Can you imagine if there's a big war in Europe? The sea we're talking about is the Atlantic Ocean. And who has the magic fortress to the entryway to the Atlantic Ocean from Europe? Great Britain. See? So they thought no matter who's fighting with whom, they want our fortress here. They want our land. And we better do something about this because we're going to be in trouble one of these days. So they got this guy named Sidney Camp, who was a good airplane designer, and he said, build us a plane that can take off and climb to altitude fast and shoot down bad guys before they hurt us. Okay. So he put together this airplane, and he really did well. They liked it. They began to build them in serious numbers. So remember now, this is 1935. All right. So we're going to fast forward now up until 1940. By 1940, they had more than 20 squadrons of these. I don't know the exact number in a squadron, but the total number of planes back then in a squadron added up to these 20 squadrons of around maybe just under 1,000 airplanes. So they were somewhat ready for what was about to happen. Then, in July of 1940, a major battle began. Does anyone know what its name was?
Battle of Britain.
Bingo. Battle of Britain. One of the most important battles in all of World War II. Follow me through on how this went. every day and every night from July until October 1940, German bombers and fighters would come out of occupied France, fly across the English Channel, which at one point is only 20 miles, and their goal was to beat up the British Isles so bad that they could not resist a massive seaborne invasion by the Nazis to take over the British Isles. That was the big deal, but they knew they could never have a seaborne invasion unless they had air superiority over the English Channel. So the big picture was, you know, beat these guys into submission more or less, but whatever you do, get air superiority over the Channel. Now this happened to be one of Hitler's most favorite projects. This is what he really needed. He wanted this bad, personally. So the British were kind of ready. And so between those 2 months of July and October, we find through difficult research that there were probably about 1,500 German airplanes lost, and a lesser number, maybe around a little over 1,000 of the British airplanes. But they did well. In fact, they did well enough, the British did, that Hitler became disappointed, disenchanted with the whole operation, and began to take airplanes away from them and send them over to other fronts of battle that he had going on at the time. He sadly gave up on the mission. Now then, you know the answer to this question. Did that massive seaborne invasion ever happen? Of course not. Now then, we feel as docents that if it had happened and had succeeded, this briefing would probably be given to you in German, and the world as we know it would be an entirely different place. Don't you agree to that?
Absolutely.
You bet. Okay. So it's the Hawker Hurricane, and it is considered to be one of the really important fighters of World War II. They built them in large numbers, and they built them basically all through the war. All right. I want to give you a little quote here, which you know already. Winston Churchill, you know, he was a great orator, great spokesman, and honestly, he was a great coach. You know, he gave pep talks to his people when they were suffering all these dangerous bombings and stuff of their cities. And he said these words, "Never in the history of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." And what he meant was that every man, woman, and child in the British Isles owed their life to the few young fighter pilots that flew this plane. Now, some of you guys who know a lot about airplanes are going to say, not so fast there, big boy. What about the other airplane? What was it?
Spitfire.
Absolutely. The Supermarine Spitfire. Wonderful fighter plane, but they had them in smaller numbers. And so the fact of it is that there were really two great airplanes doing the fighter business in that. The Spitfires were doing the high altitude parts, and the medium altitude parts and the ground attack were done by the Hurricane. So they share the honors, but the Hurricane was hugely important in all of this. Questions about that?